This is Only the Strong Survive, a podcast powered by Kahn Media, where we dive deep into the world of business, leadership, and innovation. I'm your host, Dan Kahn, and I'm honored to have you join us today. So, let's get ready to learn some survival skills together. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Only the Strong Survive. I'm your host, Dan Kahn, and we've got a powerhouse guest today, Ami Kassar. Ami is the founder and CEO of MultiFunding, a Philadelphia-based firm that helps entrepreneurs find smart, strategic ways to finance and grow their businesses. He's also the author of The Growth Dilemma, a columnist from 21 Hats, and a trusted advisor to places like the White House, Treasury Department, and even the Federal Reserve. If you've ever wondered how to use leverage responsibly, structure debt the right way, or fund growth without losing your soul or your shirt, this will be an episode for you. I also wanted to say in full disclosure, we have lots of guests on that either we find interesting or people that are subject matter experts. I think this might be one of the first cases we've ever had someone on who we are a customer. So just to get this out of the way up front, there's no transaction happening here. We asked Ami on because he's an expert, and there's a lot of chaos seemingly in the news. Anyway, I don't know if it's real. We'll find out today about finance and the economy, and everyone's trying to understand which way is up. And I'm hoping that we can learn about that today, but also and I've been open about this in the past, that we purchased a second agency a couple of years ago. It burned a lot more cash than we thought it would, getting it turned around. We found ourselves in a tough cash flow position last year, tried to figure out how to get an SBA loan, found that's kind of a daunting process if you've never done it before, reached out to Ami's firm because we heard about MultiFunding through the 21 Hats podcast and Lauren Feldman's group, and his team was phenomenal, and they helped us get that SBA loan, and it went from being a very challenging and stressful process to a pretty straightforward one. So Ami, welcome to the show, and thank you for your help.
Thanks. Glad we were able to help. So appreciate being on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess to start, can you explain to everybody, let's rewind and tell everyone kind of the basics of what is your company and how did you get on this journey?
So our core, Dan, is that getting a loan is hard. Getting the right loan, the best loan for your structure. We like to serve as advocates for business owners or entrepreneurs going through the process and help them get it done. And that's not an easy task. We use the SBA a lot, but not exclusively. But what I always say is that when you have a financing thing that you want to solve for, there's usually more than one way to skin the cat. And it's wise to get a couple of opinions and get some good counsel and deal with people who do it all day for a living so they can help you get it done.
And you're not a bank, you're not a lender. So at MultiFunding, you're more like a facilitator. Is that right? Where you help kind of matchmake companies with lenders?
Call us a loan broker. We've brokered close to $1 billion of funding. We'll cross $1 billion of funding sometime this summer. I mean, I don't know the details of your SBA journey, but you could innocently walk into your local bank to ask for an SBA loan, and they may or may not be experts in SBA lending. They might tell you they're experts, but you may not know better. When you're going through the process with them, you just assume whatever they're telling you is true or is normal or is legitimate. Now, within the vein of SBA lending, we funded last year with 22 different SBA lenders. Every one of them is a little bit different or more appropriate for a different situation. And we're continuously testing lenders. And we're continuously firing lenders who don't meet our service standards. One of the myths I think we've dispelled, like 95% of the time, our borrower and our lender never meet each other. The best lender for you may no longer be in your backyard.
Right. That makes sense. How does your business model work? Because in our experience, we never wrote you guys a check. You guys helped kind of find the right lender, and then you connected us with that lender and helped us with all the paperwork for the SBA loan. Are you paid by the lender?
When it's SBA loans, we're paid by the lender commission. In most other cases, when it's not an SBA loan, typically we charge the customer fee, but it's all contingent based. It's based on success. What you didn't pay any more for your SBA loan that you got through us than you would have if you'd gone to the bank directly.
What are the kind of ranges of companies you typically work with in terms of like revenue or size?
So it's a little bit all over the place. So we gauge it more by loan size than by company size, but a small transaction for us is $100,000 or $150,000, and a big transaction for us is sort of $8 to $10 million, and then kind of everything in the middle of that. So we have clients that might have $1 million of revenue and they need an injection of growth capital. Some clients are $20, $30 million worth of revenue and everything in between. Typically, the common thread in our work is that controlled by an owner.
You occupy an interesting kind of niche. You're working in finance almost specifically with kind of owner-run entrepreneurial companies. Is that something, did you set out to want to work with small, mid-sized businesses and entrepreneurs, or was finance the focus, or how'd you get to the point where you're at now?
Before I started MultiFunding in 2010, I worked for the largest issuer of credit cards to small businesses in the United States. And we had 1 million customers and about $1 billion worth of market cap and 1,000 employees. And we decimated in the Great Recession. I literally got terminated by the bankruptcy trustees on a Friday, and I started MultiFunding on Saturday. The core value was to try to build a business where entrepreneurs could, in a totally transparent manner, find out the best loan options available for them. And it was a brutal start, but that's what we strive to do. That's what we'll continue to do.
Interesting. You're interacting with a lot of different types of businesses. You're interacting with a lot of owners, you and your team, as well as the lenders. So does that give you a lot of insight into sort of what is and maybe isn't working for a lot of these companies? Does that allow you to get kind of a peek behind the curtain?
I mean, we definitely have our thoughts and insights about what's going on and going out there in the economy. I'm always a little reluctant to assume that the stuff that comes in through us is necessarily indicative of the broader economy, although as we grow, I think it's probably more and more so the case. So we definitely see trends and patterns, both with the lenders and with the borrowers. And certainly the last year has been interesting, to say the least. Okay.
Well, let's talk about that. I feel like as I get older, the more I learn, the more I realize how little I know. So it's just like weird inverse curve where I'm like, I feel like I'm learning more and have less and less knowledge as I go forward, because I just realized the scope of what I don't know. And I thought that there was this like very predictable kind of pattern of economics, where, you have recessions and then kind of rebound and recessions and rebound. The last 5 years to me has felt just insane. Like I can't figure out what the heck is going on just in general. And then this year, things have felt even weirder. So can you give us kind of your take as somebody who works in finance, works with some of the biggest lenders, works with a lot of small businesses? What are you seeing and hearing out there, especially right now?
I think it's important to note that 5 years ago, COVID started. Whether we overcorrected by 20%, it doesn't really matter. Governments literally here and around the world printed trillions and trillions of dollars to keep people alive, to keep unemployment offices functioning, keep people, off food lines, keep banks solvent, et cetera, et cetera. I still think our continually living through what I call COVID dominoes. That's like a tsunami hitting the financial system. I don't think there's any playbook in history where governments have printed so much money all at once and literally dumped it into economies. There are social, political, economic, health dominoes that keep bouncing from that. They are affecting different companies at different times. Top that with the new political changes in this country, which I don't like to opine in politics. I can talk about what I think is happening, but it's wild out there.
And tariffs and all that stuff is kind of
tariffs and changes in government spending. And there's so much unpredictability right now.
It's interesting you made that comment about the COVID thing, because I think at this point it's pretty clear that when you print that much money and dump it into an economy, it's going to cause inflation, which definitely what happened, right? Like we all lived through that.
Not a surprise.
Right. I had this epiphany. It's interesting you brought this up. Just in the last week, I've been reading a book called Profit First. It has me thinking about a lot of things, and something that has occurred to me, and every business is different. I'm sure this does not apply to a lot of people. And God, knows if you owned a restaurant in LA or New York in March of 2020, you were probably praying for some sort of bailout or PPP funds or something. And there are certainly businesses that without those bailout and government funding programs, they would have immediately died within, a few months. So I totally appreciate and understand the point of those programs like EIDL and PPP, but we're a marketing agency and a PR agency, and a third of our business is supporting in-person events. It was March 20th, 2020. I remember because I got all the calls within a 24-hour period. 30% of our top line revenue evaporated in 24 hours. And my God, it was terrifying, right? So I remember that. I'm like, oh my God, what do I do? And then we found out about these different programs and we didn't have to lay anyone off. So at the time, it felt good. I was like, oh, there's a lifeline. And I felt better about it. And we participated in those programs and we got forgiveness and all that. It has occurred to me 5 years later that that was probably not the healthy thing for my business because we didn't lose 70% of our revenue. And with that 30% loss, if I had taken no EIDL money, if I had taken no PPP money, we would have had to make some serious cuts. We would have had to lean way out, but we would have survived. I'm pretty confident about that. So I think we would have survived, and it would have forced me to learn how to operate the business in a much leaner, more efficient way. And I think in retrospect, we would have come out of that thing stronger and more profitable versus the inverse of what happened, where we took this money that was, some of it was free money, some of it was like 3% for 30 years. It encouraged maybe not the most responsible behavior on my part, where I'm buying businesses and I'm investing heavily in infrastructure and new equipment and stuff that we probably would not have normally written checks for. And it created this like false sense of security. And then the money was gone, and the kind of foundation that the house was sitting on was not as solid as it should have been. And that's how we ended up in the position last year where I needed a SBA loan. And we now finally have systems in place that have turned that around. But I don't know that it necessarily was the healthiest thing for us. I think we probably would have been better if we had just learned the survival skills to get through that without it. I don't know that it was universally a positive for everybody, right? I think, like I said, if you had a restaurant, I hear you. And that was probably a lifeline that you needed if you were able to get through it. So what do you think as we try to navigate the unpredictability of the current administration, the continued inflation stuff? You know, it seems like the whole China thing is getting sort of weird. And I mean, like, so we work in industries where a lot of production is still coming, if not from China, at least from Asia. It seems like sort of whether the whole system was broken or not, it was at least stable for decades. And I hear from a lot of small business owners right now that they're just trying to figure out how to navigate their finances to move forward and just stay in business and keep things as stable as possible. What do you counsel people when they're trying to just figure out a roadmap for the next 6 months, next year?
So can we unpack that? Because you shared a lot. So I would talk first about the idle loans, and then I want to talk about the future. I think the idle loan program in the last half of it, or in the Biden administration, was a complete travesty.
How so?
In the first Trump administration, they did about 3.6 million of these, and the average loan size was $70,000. And in the Biden administration, where they came in and there was like $250 billion approximately left in the budget, they did about 400,000 of these, and the average loan was $700,000. They literally gave the money out like it was candy, with no proof of economic injury or ability to pay it back. And even if a company was not financially stable before COVID, they could still get the money. Money flooded the market and flooded balance sheets. And then you didn't have to pay it back for 2 or 2.5 years, or start paying it back, and gave everyone this false sense of security, like it was party time. And when you put too much money in a company like that, often cause much more harm than good. Many people just thought they wouldn't have to pay it back. Many people didn't really understand the conditions about what the money was intended for. I don't think the government realized that half of businesses actually prospered and did fine during COVID. And so I really think that particularly that last influx of idle money is going to cause a lot of harm for many, many decades. Top it off now, all the people that were hired to get that money out the door and run that program have essentially been terminated, or are being terminated this week. And they're moving the SBA to pre-pandemic staffing levels. What that means is basically that there's a portfolio now there of 3 or 3.5 million loans left that are direct loans with the government that have to be managed. And the question is, who's going to do the work? Just kind of loaded a lot on you, but you kind of hit one of my pet peeves.
Well, I mean, that's what we're feeling right now. We're kind of a small version of it because it wasn't a ton of money and we survived, and we were a viable business before that. But that was literally our experience. And honestly, I mean, I didn't figure this out until like a week ago. So I'm late to the party.
I mean, there were plenty of people that if you use the money to like pay for divorce settlement or buy a jet, or I know guys who bought their houses with it and stuff like that. In my opinion, those guys belong in jail. There are plenty of people, because most small businesses aren't great finance people, who just ran their businesses thinking everything was okay because they had that surplus cash, until they woke up one day and it wasn't. And that's a lot of what we saw last year in the economy. A lot of what we have been seeing, a lot of businesses whose COVID cash has dried up, and suddenly it's like a lot of, oh shit moments. Like, now what do I do? And then they're realizing that their costs have gone up. Inflation has gone up. They may or may not even be profitable. And you are fortunate you were able to get another loan. Many people can't.
In my experience personally, and with some of the small businesses we work with, you work with way more businesses than I do. So I'd love to get your perspective. But at least in my case and some of the businesses that we work with, most of these owners, CEOs, presidents didn't go to business school. They don't have a background in finance or accounting. They usually are a product person or a service person, and they sort of have an idea and start a business. So for most of us, myself included, I look at a P&L, once a month, or now I try and do it weekly. I have some flash reports we've developed internally. We're getting better at it now. But for the most part, I just check my accounts and my P&L. And if there's money in the account, and if the P&L looks good, I kind of internally say, yep, this is all good. Everything's good. And it wasn't until there wasn't money in the account that I started freaking out and hitting the red button and going like, wait a second, what's going on? And that's when we had to start developing tools to figure out our cash burn and our cash flow, have sort of predictors in place to try and understand what our cash flow is going to be over the course of the year. Is that common? And is that when people start saying like, okay, I need a loan, is because they're like, maybe they have a lot of AR, but they have no cash on hand? Like, what is the trigger for when
think
people...
the trigger for that should be it's amazing, shocking to me how many small businesses don't have a line of credit. I always like to see a line of credit of around 10% of top line sales or 85% of AR, or whatever is bigger. And for the line of credit to be there for seasonality, working capital, and emergencies, really for the unexpected. I had a call with a business yesterday that was actually quite healthy. He wanted a line, and he should have a line. He has no line. And his business was, I think, around $2.5 or $3 million top line revenue. He should have a line of about $250,000. And he said, I won't personally guarantee the line. To which I responded to him that was really, I encouraged him to think about it a little bit differently. If suddenly your business was in crisis and you needed cash, would you like to have the optionality of a line there that's personally guaranteed that you can decide to use or not? But you should have that optionality there. So I really think most small businesses are not good at their financials or their cash management. And especially in turbulent times, I have a picture I use when I do talks and lectures of an offensive and a defensive player ready to like beat each other up in a football game. And I say, this is how you need to think about your balance sheet. You need to be a good team is set up for flexibility, because as you run your business, there could be unexpected opportunities that pop up and unexpected crises that pop up. And you want to be ideally situated for both.
Got it. Okay. So basically, it sounds like the TLDR version of that is get the line when you don't need it.
Get the line when you don't need it.
I have another question, and I've heard you talk about this a little bit with Lauren, and I wanted to see if we can get into it now. I started my business in 2008, and about 2010-ish, 2011, somewhere in there, we were 3 or 4 years in, had kind of a nice growth trajectory, had, I think at that point, 3 or 4 employees. 2 things happened simultaneously. We decided to move, which is expensive, to a different town and location. And we lost a major account, both like we had already initiated the move, lose an account, cash flow gets tight. I'm like, I want a little bit of buffer here. And at the time I had been banking with Wells personally for like 20 something years, and for the business since its inception. And I thought it would be an easy deal. And I walk into my local branch, I talked to their business rep, and I said, here's what we need. And it wasn't a lot of money. The business was very small at the time. So I think I was looking for like 50 grand line of credit or something like that. And they had me fill out all the paperwork. I had good credit. Business was fairly young, but was doing probably close to $1 million a year. Never got a phone call. No, literally got a form letter. It wasn't even signed by someone at my local branch. I just get a form letter rejecting me. And I was so pissed that I actually pulled my business from Wells and ended up, after we made the move and we gutted it out and figured it out, we ended up finding a local community bank that we've banked with ever since. And it's a much better relationship. And that is where our line of credit is. And they actually call me on the phone when they have a question or an issue or whatever. And what is your take on where to bank, what to look for in a bank, what to look for in a lender? How should businesses kind of think about that as they...
Yeah. So I always say you don't want to be too big for your lender, and you don't want to be too small for your lender. You want to be important to your lender. So typically I have clients steer far away from a Chase or a Wells or anybody like that, because you're just a little blip there's nothing there. I would much rather the client work with a smaller community bank that actually cares about them and they're important to them. You need to have relationships with a couple of people at your bank more than your business development officer. And you need to maintain it, because in the normal course of business, you're probably not going to think much about your bank. But when you need your bank, you need your bank.
All right. Well, let's shift gears for a second. You wrote a book called The Growth Dilemma. It's about kind of the tension between growth and risk. What would you say is the kind of core message of the book?
I don't think we talk about this enough, but we all have a different risk tolerance. There's no right or wrong. I think you should understand what your risk tolerance is and be okay with it. That could impact the decisions about how big you want to grow your business and how fast and how much risk you want to take. I'm not a big believer in the Inc. 5000. I much rather see people grow the business at the way you want to, at the pace you want to. I always say there's nothing more important than a good night's sleep.
I don't know what that's like, but that sounds great.
It's not just all about rapid, fast growth. If debt or the idea of a loan is going to give you so much agita, get investors. If you could potentially double your business with a few $100,000 of a loan, but it's causing you so much stress, just grow slower. It's okay. Recognizing that risk tolerance is a big thing. It's different for different people. There's not one size fits all. How you want to choose it and how you want to mix it up, it's all good.
Well, I will admit we've been on the Inc. 5000 a few times, and I actually agree with your point, because what's taken me a few years to understand. At the time, it was ego for me, right? Like we had a lot of growth. I wanted the plaque. And I'm like, oh, look at that. We're on the Inc. 5000. What I've come to realize, to be totally transparent, is first of all, the Inc. 5000, for those who are listening and don't know what it is, Inc. magazine does this kind of ranking of the fastest growing companies. But the way they measure it is, I think it's 3 years ago's top line revenue number to last year's top line revenue number. Maybe it's 4 years ago to last year. It's like a 3-year spread. That's all they're measuring is revenue. So first of all, they're not looking at profitability. They're not looking at bottom line. And then it's a percentage. So if your company did $10,000 and then all of a sudden did $100,000, you had 10x growth, and they see that as huge growth. But it's pretty easy to go from 10 grand to 100 grand. It's way harder to go from 10 million to 100 million. And who knows if that company is even actually a functioning company or is just completely saddled with debt and loss. And so I chased the wrong thing. So there's another example where I maybe didn't do it the right way, which I guess leads to my question, which is, I know in the book you talk about using leverage to responsibly grow and responsibly build wealth. What does that mean? Like, how do you define leverage and how do you define the word responsibly? Like, what does that look like?
I would say if you're considering taking on debt, really calculate what the monthly payment is going to be. Stare at that for a while and feel really confident that the investments you're going to make with that loan, and then you're good to go. Don't ever take on a loan without a plan, and don't take on the loan without understanding what the monthly payment will be, and get yourself comfortable about what that will look like.
And leverage is what? That's,
you owe the money. Let's say, Dan, you want to hire 5 more people for some reason, for whatever project.
right.
And that investment's going to be $500,000, and you don't have cash to do it. Let's say you could qualify for an SBA loan, and they'll give you that $500,000, but your monthly payment is $6,600 a month. What you can do is you can stare at that, and you can decide if that payment, the upside of what you're planning to do, if the risk and the benefit match it for yourself. Think about the left side and the right side of your brain in that decision, and then decide if you want to proceed. You could also, and some people would say, I don't want to go through the pain of getting an SBA loan, and I really want to hire those 5 people, and I think it's going to go great. So I'm going to go get a loan that'll fund in 24 or 36 hours. My monthly payment is going to be $40,000. And that, in my opinion, is irresponsible debt. So it's balancing the two out.
Yeah. So it's doing the math to figure out, okay, if I don't take a loan, obviously I don't have the overhead of the loan, but it limits my amount to grow. If I do take the loan, I know what my monthly payment's going to be with interest, but that's going to allow me to hire these people, which also that's an additional expense on top of the loan. But how much revenue can I make by hiring those people? I guess where do those two lines meet?
Maybe growing slower is okay. If you don't feel like you're going to sleep at night with that amount of risk and you're not comfortable enough in your business plan associated with that risk, don't do it.
Interesting. Okay. What do you tell business owners? How do you coach them to kind of view debt and equity in their businesses? Is that something like obviously debt we're talking about a lot today, but we haven't really talked about equity. Is that something you get into?
Look, sometimes you need money and there's no choice. It has to be debt or it has to be equity. Sometimes there is a choice, and both come with different pros and cons. Lenders, the money has to be paid back, or the equity, you now have a partner at the table who has a say in the future of the business. You have to balance. Now, there might be a particular partner that brings a lot of value to the business or not.
So in one sense, you're selling a piece of the business, but you may get either a burden or an asset in that partner, or you work with the bank or an SBA loan, you retain full control, but you have the debt, you have the interest on the debt, and it's probably secured by your house or your AR or your building or whatever. Do you recommend people use their house to secure a line like that or no?
It depends. It's a personal decision. It depends on your risk tolerance and where you're at.
Well, let's talk about SBA loans. Can you define for the audience, like what is the SBA and why do they exist and what are these programs that they offer?
The SBA is there to encourage banks and some non-bank lenders to make riskier loans than they otherwise would. Basically, so that 75% of the loan defaults is guaranteed by the government. And so that government guarantee serves as some collateral for the lender. And the idea is that the SBA loans stimulate the economy and make it easier for small businesses to get loans and to grow. There are all kinds of SBA loans in different shapes and sizes for different needs: franchise, startup, working capital, growth capital, debt consolidation, buy out a partner, buy a business, buy an owner-occupied building, et cetera, et cetera. So there are different ways to do it, and you have to do what's best. It's a very worthwhile thing, largely, especially say in your loan, Dan, you have 10 years to pay it back. So the monthly payment is much smaller than if you'd gone to the bank and they gave you 5 years to pay it back. And that helps with cash flow.
So it's a federal agency, I guess, or
federal agency, correct.
So it's a federal agency that basically, it sounds like, so these banks that maybe would see small businesses as too risky, they're backstopping it. They're basically saying, look, we'll get you back, even if this company defaults or goes away or whatever. So when you're going through the approval process, it sounds like you have to kind of go through it twice, because first you go to the SBA, I assume, are they looking at financials? Are they looking at the company? And then
no,
the lender?
The lender. Well, if you use a preferred lender who's got the lending authority, then the SBA doesn't look at any financials. If you use a non-preferred lender, which we don't recommend, the SBA will review the entire package. But ultimately, each bank makes its own credit decision, and the lender and the SBA, you just have to follow the rules and structure of the SBA.
Okay. So a preferred lender is already in their like ecosystem. They know how to sort of...
Correct. And that's like, we'd always use preferred lenders.
And their underwriters know what the SBA wants. So it becomes kind of one streamlined process. Interesting. Okay. When you speak to a client or potential client and they're saying, hey, look, I'm in a tough cash flow position, or maybe they're following your advice and they say, well, things are great, but we want to have a rainy day fund. How do you help steer them towards either an SBA loan or a line of credit? How do they, if somebody's at home, listening to this, is it different every case?
It's a little bit different in every case, but if it's a line of credit, it's there for seasonality, working capital, emergencies. Some businesses, a line of credit is just part of the furniture. Say if they have a lot of inventory or accounts receivable, they just need it there to float cash. If you're making investments in your business, you should really ideally do that with term debt. You've got time to pay off for those investments to work.
Got it. So sort of short-term pain line of credit, long-term investment would be more like an SBA loan.
Correct. Now, line of credits are just for short-term pain. So if, as an example, there's a business that has a lot of inventory and a lot of AR, and there's a lot of holding costs for all that. In that case, the line of credit it's kind of part of the financial calculus. They need to borrow money in order to keep the business operating.
Got it. Okay. A business coach I've worked with used to be a banker, and she's said to me a few times over the years, she said, look, when you're, whether it's a line of credit or a loan or even just talking to a banker or someone like you, she's always said, as someone who used to work in banking, that, you need to be open, honest, and transparent always. And then you also just have to tell a story that makes sense, because nobody's inside your business the way you are. So you just have to just explain what's going on. And as long as it makes sense, and as long as, people, because look, things happen, right? The economy shifts, a partner wants out, you want to buy your building, whatever the story is, you have to tell a story that makes them understand why you need the money. It's a two-part question. First part is that true? And the second part is knowing how many businesses you've helped over the years. What are the kind of the common stories you end up hearing, if that's the case? And what are the reasons people end up needing either emergency funding, or they run out of cash, or they need help?
Well, people need help for different reasons. They're either trying to grow and expand, or they're going through a growth curve that requires cash, or something unexpected happened. We don't only help people in emergencies. Okay. So every situation is a little bit different, but you have to craft the story. Like in some ways, we tell stories to banks. So, and you have to be able to speak in their language and tell them the story of the lender, the story of what's going on in a way that makes sense. The other thing we say is that it's super important, once you have a relationship with a bank, to keep that relationship and to let that banker know if you see trouble coming down the line, to let them know what you see coming down the line, so that they are prepared for it, if that makes any sense.
Got it. Okay. So I totally understand that, like, every business is different and they're going to have different challenges. If you were to give someone who approached you advice saying, hey, I'm starting a business from scratch, what advice would you give them about how to sort of structure accounting, finance, their kind of general position on cash flow?
Stay on top of it, stay healthy, absolutely invest in good bookkeeping and accounting, have regular reporting, and stay totally in charge of your game.
Is there a line where somebody, because so many small businesses don't really handle their accounting in-house, right? Maybe they hire a part-time bookkeeper, then they get to a point where maybe they have a full-time in-house bookkeeper, but they'll outsource to an accountant or a part-time, like a fractional CFO. Do you see any benefit or commonality in the people you work with where one is better than the other?
It depends on the situation and how big the business is and what the needs are. But I do think it's important and healthy to check in on your bookkeeping and accounting. And like everything else in life, the bookkeeping or accounting that serve you at one level, you need to upgrade it to get to the next level. You don't need a CFO until you hit a certain level, et cetera, et cetera. So checking in and making sure, but really also feeling, good books are like a linchpin for success, right? And so being really clear that you have control of your financials is also very important.
Obviously, having clean, accurate books is universal, I would assume, for everybody. Is there like a frequency and type of reporting that you recommend people have in front of them, whether it's weekly or monthly or quarterly, in terms of like what?
At least monthly, a regular closing cycle, and review monthly financials, and hopefully have it against a budget and see how you're doing. Absolutely.
And then beyond sort of a P&L and a AR report and things like that, what else do you recommend people look at?
Cash flow statement, which most people don't understand, and the ability to also project cash going out for the next few weeks. Do you have any concerns? Like I see expected cash balances for the next 2 to 3 weeks all the time, just to make sure that, sometimes our cash flow can look like a bad EKG chart based on closings and stuff. And just to see that's very important.
Speaking of which, we're going to shift gears a little bit. I know you don't have a crystal ball, but I can tell you in my own business and in the businesses that we work with, almost universally, we've been having a very weird experience pretty much since the turn of the year. And I don't know what's going on, but we have great clients. Most of them are long-term clients. They're all good people, but we've had so many people drawn out payments and late paying invoices. And, we're just chasing stuff much more than we normally do. The relationships are still good, but they're saying like, yeah, everyone's just slow paying everything right now. And are you hearing that as well? Or is that?
There's a lot of uncertainty out there and a lot of confusion. It's quite fascinating to me. We're really, really busy since the election, and a lot of activity and a lot of people borrowing and growing and expanding and looking towards a future, which take to be a good sign. But there are a lot of fundamentals out there that are making people nervous, and I don't blame them.
What kind of fundamentals?
People just don't understand what the impact of government cuts is going to do to their business. I'm not saying we shouldn't cut government spending, but they're worried about that. For businesses that rely on tariffs on imports or exports in some capacity, they're very confused about what all this means to their business, what demand means to their business. Lay off 500,000 government workers, that's going to, in certain economies, certain industries are hit differently. The impact of all this tariff work is highly unclear. And so I always say, I just keep my head down and try keep working and moving. But there's a lot of confusion out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, we went through a period, kind of an extended period, where money was really cheap. And I mean, like on the personal side, not the business side, I'm very fortunate. I'm one of those lucky idiots that somehow managed to get like a 2.5 loan on my house. And so now I'm like kind of handcuffed to the house forever because I don't want to sign up for a 4 or 5 point increase. I just remember kind of watching the housing market on the personal side of things when all of a sudden interest rates started going up aggressively and you could just hear crickets in the real estate market for a while. Have things sort of reached sort of an equilibrium in the lending market right now? Is that still really dynamic? Do you think rates are going to go up or go down? And this is more on the business side. Any way to tell what's happening? Who knows? Okay.
I try not to worry about it because you can only control what you can control.
I think you just have to adapt. I always like to think about it. I wrote about this in my column, I think on 21 Hats last week, about when COVID started. There were 2 restaurants near us next to each other. One shut their doors, and 2 weeks later, one had takeout customers like around the block waiting to get food. I always strive to be that restaurant. Things are changing. You can shut or you can adapt. And it's scary, but I don't think anyone has a crystal ball about what any of this means, but it is what it is.
And we're recording this sort of the end of March. It's March, I think, 25th. And the rate and pace at which things are moving, I don't know what'll be, the case in 2 or 3 weeks when this drops. But as of now, have you seen or heard anything from the lenders in terms of are things tightening up? Are they still writing loans? Everything is
Lenders
good?
are open for business and working away.
That's great. Okay.
Not all lenders are open for business, but plenty are, and we're just pushing through.
Well, anecdotally, for what it's worth, we also, and we are a B2B business, and like you, and things got pretty quiet in January, and I started to get concerned. And same, the phone's ringing off the hook. It's great. So I think people are, like you said, at least in our little corner of the world, they're confused and a little bit nervous, but they're also like making some big swings. So
it's a good sign. We should encourage that.
As you think back on your career as an entrepreneur and as a business owner who also works with a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs, what advice would you give to somebody who is feeling sort of stuck between wanting to grow, wanting to leverage and take on some debt to really grow their business, but also being afraid of that kind of next step and kind of the mental part of kind of taking on all that extra risk?
I mean, ultimately, my advice is do what's most comfortable for you. I do tell the story, though, of a client or a prospective client who canceled a call with me the day after Russia invaded Ukraine because he thought the world was about to end. We're still here. If the world ends, it won't matter anyway.
This is true. Interesting. Well, and that is one thing I'm having to remind myself pretty regularly is it's okay to turn off the news because they're not in the business of telling you the news. They're in the business of getting eyeballs, right? And scaring people into watching.
I kind of have to read it because of the work I'm in, but I try not to give it much credibility.
Because it'll scare you every time. As you think about your own career and your own arc and running a team and running a successful business, and you think back, what's the biggest mistake you made and what did you learn from it?
Plenty of mistakes I've made over the year. Grow too fast, grow too slow, hire the wrong person, try this, it didn't work. I try not to cry over spilled milk. 51% of the decisions we're making are good. That would be great. I don't look at the world that way. Everything is a learning lesson. Sure, there are things I would have maybe done a little bit differently there or there, but I don't spend too much time looking in the rearview mirror. I look forward.
I like that. That's the first time anyone's ever answered that question that way. To wrap things up, any advice you'd give people out there who follow your career and want to work on the finance side of business and entrepreneurship? How would they pursue a career? What would you tell them to do?
I think the best learning for a young person trying to get in this business is get into the business of doing credit analysis or underwriting of small business loans, because the amount you'll learn by seeing what happens in these different businesses is incredible.
Oh, that's interesting. So get under the hood.
Yeah, get under the hood.
Very good. Where can people learn more about you and about multifunding?
I have a daily blog at omnisites.com, multifunding, www.multifunding.com.
Excellent. Ami, this has been incredibly insightful. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your time. It was fun to be with you.
Absolutely. And thank you for your help. You really helped us out.
So happy to hear that. It's great.
Well, everyone, that's a wrap for this episode of Only the Strong Survive. If you got value from this conversation, please be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and check out our past episodes. Thanks again to Ami Kassar, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.